So today we're going to talk about Chapter 7, Audit Evidence. And what is evidence in general? Now let me just share my screen. Audit evidence. We talked about audit, and today we're going to talk about evidence, and we're going to connect the two and call it audit evidence. But before we talk about audit evidence, let's talk about what is evidence. Generally, a crime occurs, an investigator comes, and they're looking for evidence. What they're looking for are information that will support what happened, or that will refute what didn't happen. Evidence is something that we see every day in our life, and we use it every day in our life without thinking of it as audit evidence. Think of this. Your younger sibling is coming home late from school, and you ask them what they've been doing. And they said, well, they're going to the library. Now, if every day they're coming home late and they're going to the library, you expect to see some improvement in their grades. But the grades are not improving. So it leads you to question the evidence, which is the grade, didn't support the fact that they're going to the library. So you start looking for more evidence to see what they're doing. So one day, you went to inspect if they're in the library. And of course, they're in the library. But instead of studying, which they can lead you to believe that maybe they're studying, they're probably doing some hanky-panky. So what did you do? Your younger sibling gave you the theory that they are at the library, lead you to believe that, well, they are studying after school. That's why they're coming home late. You did an investigation and you obtain evidence. One evidence is the grade. The grade doesn't show that they are improving. And after that doesn't suffice, you decide to go and observe what they're doing at the library. And indeed, they're at the library, but they're not doing their schoolwork as you thought that they were doing at the library, right? So what happened here? You, being the person who is the auditor in this situation, assume that your sibling is at the library. In auditing, we do not want to make any assumptions. We want to have a clear line of questioning. So you ask your sibling where they were, they said they were at the library. What were you doing at the library? That's the follow-up question. What were you doing at the library? And a good auditor will get a clear response of what they were doing at the library. Now, if they said they were studying, and then you go to the library, you see that they are not studying, then they misrepresented. But because you didn't ask the pertinent question, your sibling did not misrepresent. But let's get back to the evidence part of it. You are looking for information that will support that your sibling is at the library studying, or that will refute the fact that they're at the library studying. They're not studying at the library then. So you may observe them. You may look at their performance in class. Did they get any better? You may ask their friends. You may look at their books to see what exactly they were doing at the library. All of these are evidence. Think of this. You got a date for last Saturday night. and your significant other call you an hour before the date and they said they can't make it, they have something else to do. If if this is the first time they do it, you probably can accept it, especially if you trust them a lot. But if they've been doing that pretty often, you probably want to investigate. You want to audit. An audit is like an investigation to a lesser extent. You want to audit them to see if they had something legitimate that they could not go to a date with you. So how you go about doing that? Well, most of the time it's guys that are the ones that breaking the date. So you're gonna call their friends and ask if they were home on Saturday night. You won't tell them what you're up to. You'll just ask, is this guy home on Saturday night? Or what did he do? And if your friend says, oh, we went out together and we were having drinks, then you know that he didn't break your date for any legitimate reason. On the other hand, he said, yes, he was home. He got a big exam and he's studying because he had an auditing exam in a week and a half. It may be a legitimate excuse. So what you do, you are obtaining information to corroborate or to refute a representation. What's the representation? Your boyfriend or girlfriend had a date with you. They had to break it and they said that they have something important to do. You want to check and see, did they really have something important to do or not? So you will gather evidence, which is evidence are basically you're gathering information to either support or refute the fact that they had a legitimate excuse. Now, in this chapter, we're going to talk about 8 types of evidence that auditor uses. These evidence are not only limited to auditor, but to anything that you're looking to support or corroborate, you will gather these 8 types of evidence. So let's dive into the chapter. What are we going to talk about? We will contrast audit evidence with evidence used by other professionals. What other professions use evidence? Well, the first one that comes to mind is the legal profession. Right? If you have a case, you want to present the evidence. Or any profession where you do an investigative work, the police. If a crime occurs, they want to investigate and gather evidence so that they could either charge or not charge someone. So how are their evidence different from audit evidence? We're going to identify the 4 audit evidence decisions that are needed to create an audit program. And we can talk about what an audit program is. What are the decisions you go through and how you put together your audit program? 3, we're going to specify the characteristics that determine the persuasiveness of evidence. What do we mean by the persuasiveness of evidence? We mean, when we talk about the persuasiveness of evidence, we talk about how that evidence is compelling, the compellingness, how that evidence is driving you to form a conclusion. What are the characteristics that are the driving force behind that evidence to make you form a conclusion? Now, some evidence are more persuasive than the other. Think of this. All of you took accounting 202. If I want to know your grade in accounting 202, well, there's several ways of doing it. What I could ask you, but you could also misrepresent. You get a bad grade, you don't want to say that, so you say you got a good grade. I could ask your friends, same thing occur. If they like you, they may want to say you get a good grade. If they don't like you, they may want to say you get a bad grade. They may be biased also. I could ask your professors. They may not remember exactly. We professors are all old and a little senile, you know. We don't remember everything the correct way. So when we talk to you young people, you assume that we are remembering just as good as you guys are. No, we are not. Or I could go to your transcript and right away, I got very conclusive evidence that of what your grade is in accounting 202. Now, what makes that transcript very conclusive? That's what we're going to talk about. That's what we meant by the persuasiveness of evidence. That transcript is very persuasive. What are the characteristics that make it persuasive? That's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. 4, we're going to identify and apply the 8 types of evidence used in auditing. I gave you examples of some of them before, but here we're going to dive into the 8 different types of evidence and what they are and how they're being used. And then the second part of the chapter, we're going to talk about audit documentation. How do you document your audit work? How do you prepare and organize the audit documentation? And then lastly, we'll talk about how technology affects audit evidence and audit documentation. Technology today affects everything that we do in our daily lives, not only audit evidence. Some of you guys are very familiar with that. COVID-19 occurred, and what happened? If you never took an online course, guess what? You have to take an online course. A lot of you would have preferred to have this course in a classroom setting. Well, we don't have that option. So we all were forced 2 semesters ago to be on the online environment, whether we like it or not. What did COVID-19 do? It brings forward the evidence, probably by 5 or 10 years. Technology that we were going to get accustomed to 5 or 10 years from now, it brings it to present day, and we are forced to get competent in a very short time. So the professors like myself who were teaching online and hybrid courses for years wasn't the problem. But for some professors, it was a big problem to get their course last spring, to get their course from a classroom format to an online format. Some of you students were a big problem who never took an online course to move from a classroom format to an online format. And like any changes that we make, we are very uncomfortable with it for the first, until we get accustomed to it. So technology plays a big part in what we're doing in our daily lives and will continue to even play a bigger part in the future. 15, 20 years ago, you hardly see anyone with a cell phone. Today, the very little kid have a cell phone. Right? You can't leave home without it. It's like putting on your shirt in the morning or your dress in the morning. Oh, you forget your cell phone home. You got to go back and get it. So, contrast audit evidence with evidence used by other professions. How is audit evidence different than evidence used by other professions? Think of the police profession. A crime occurs, the police showed up, and they investigate. They have to gather evidence. So they seal off the crime scene and they're gathering evidence. They're looking for anything that will support or indicate who committed the crime. But with police gathering evidence, they have to be very conclusive. Think if it's a murder scene, someone was killed. The evidence you gathered have to be very conclusive, because that evidence may be sending someone to jail for the rest of their life or for a very long time. It will make a dramatic impact in someone's life on a murder case. In auditing, the evidence we gather doesn't have to be that conclusive. When we talk about evidence in court, we're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt. When we're talking about evidence in auditing, the evidence we gather must give you reasonable assurance. What do we mean by reasonable assurance? It gives you reason to believe that whatever happened. So in auditing, we are looking for a much lesser persuasiveness of evidence than in a crime scene. We are looking for evidence that give us reasonable assurance. So evidence are any information used by the auditor to determine whether the information being audited is stated in accordance with established criteria. The information being audited, what is the information being audited in our situation? Most of the time, the information that we are auditing is a client financial statement. Not all the time, but most of the time we are auditing the client financial statement. And it's stated in accordance with established criteria. What are the established criteria? In the United States, the established criteria is generally accepted accounting principles. We are looking to see if those financial statements, the client financial statement, are stated in accordance with the rules established by GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. The use of evidence is not unique to auditors. Like talk about the other professions that use evidence. The police, the lawyers, even the doctors. Think of this. You go to the doctor and tell the doctor, oh, I got a tummy ache. The doctor will ask you some questions. The doctor will feel your tummy. The doctor may do a scan of your tummy to determine what's wrong. They're looking for evidence to point them into the direction of what may be causing the pain in your tummy. So they also are gathering evidence, but their evidence is of a slightly different nature. Evidence is also used by scientists, lawyers, and historians. We talk about lawyers, scientists. Today, science has elevated itself so much that we could go to the moon. Soon, we might be living in the moon. Right now, they're looking for evidence to see if life could sustain in the moon. What evidence they're looking for? They're looking for information that will indicate to them that the moon can sustain life similar to the Earth. And if that holds true, then we may have people living up in the moon. And it's not far-fetched to think that the next generation, we may have people living in the moon. Think of it, our grandparents. If you had tell them that we could transmit information, written information, through a fax line or a phone line or email, they would say, you're nuts. If I could tell that I could see what somebody's doing in a different country, or if I could tell my grandparents that I could be in Florida and lecture to my students in New York, they will think we are nuts. So with technology moving at the speed it's moving, you don't know what could happen in the future generation. Sky's the limit. Historians, they go back and see what happened in the past and investigate, and they're looking for information that will tell them what exactly happened so that they could write these stories. Figure 7.1 gives you some of the characteristics of evidence for a scientific experiment, a legal case, and an audit of financial statement, and they compare them. You could look through that. Use of the evidence. The scientific experiment determine effects of using the medicine. Right now, they're doing a lot of scientific experiment to determine the effect of COVID-19. As recent as I think yesterday, many places have pulled off the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And the CDC is reviewing Johnson & Johnson to see, because there are some side effects that was caused. Legal cases involving an accused thief. Decide guilt or innocent of the accused. Audit the financial statement, determine whether the financial statements are fairly presented. Fairly presented doesn't mean they're accurate. It means that there could be errors, but those errors can be inconsequential. So you could go through that and read through and follow it through on the nature of evidence, where they compare evidence between the auditor, the legal, and the scientific profession. The 4 audit evidence decisions that are needed to create an audit program. What evidence to select? When to examine the evidence? How to examine the evidence? Where to gather the evidence? The audit decision, which audit procedure to use? How should we gather the evidence? What are audit procedures? Audit procedures are detailed instructions for collection of a particular type of evidence. There are various different audit procedures that we could use. Which one should we use? Talk about how we should collect the information. What sample size to select for a given procedure? How much evidence we should look at? Three, which item to select from the population? Once we determine how much, well, if there are 100 items, which one we should select and how we should select them? And 4, when to perform the procedures. So these are the questions the auditor have to answer in terms of making their decisions on audit evidence selection. Audit program are detailed instructions for collection of a particular type of evidence. All the audit procedures together form the audit program. So the audit program is a list of audit procedures, and the audit procedures are detailed instructions for collection of a particular evidence. The audit procedure we use, we take into consideration in determining the sample size, the item to select, and the timing of the test, when the test is conducted. Today with the technology, a lot of auditors use audit software packages to generate audit program. They'll use software packages to generate the sample, to select the items. So a lot of technology is being incorporated in the world of today's auditing. Item 3, the characteristic that determine the persuasiveness of evidence. When we're talking about the persuasiveness of evidence, we're talking about those characteristics that force you or drive you to form a conclusion. When we talk about evidence, it must be relevant and it must be reliable. The 2 determinant characteristics are the appropriateness and the sufficiency. The evidence must be appropriate, and we must have sufficient, we must have enough of the evidence to form a conclusion. 6 characteristics of reliable evidence. Go back to the example I gave you earlier, where I'm trying to determine your grade in accounting 202. And I said, if I just look at your transcript, that one piece of evidence will give me your grade. That transcript is very persuasive piece of evidence. Why? Well, for an evidence to be persuasive, you look at the independence of the provider. That grade on your transcript is provided by an independent person, the professor. And as professors, we should be independent. We should be unbiased. We should give a student the grade that they deserve based on their work in the classroom. 2, the effectiveness of the client internal controls. What do we mean by internal controls? We talk about this company system of internal control. We talk about the policies and procedures that company implement to safeguard their asset and to ensure reliable financial information and other information. In chapter 11 and 12, we're going to talk about detail about internal controls. Information prepared under a strong system of internal control are generally more reliable than information prepared under a weak system of internal control. In any college environment, there's generally a strong system of internal control governing your grades. The grades are assigned by a professor after giving you a series of evaluation. It could be exam, projects, etc. The grades are reviewed by the department chair. The grades are reviewed by the provost of the college, and the grades are reviewed by registrar to make sure that the grades are accurate. Third characteristic of reliability, direct knowledge. If you have direct knowledge of something, it's more reliable than secondhand knowledge. You ever hear a story that something happened in your village or town or whatever, and by then you hear the story so distorted? Why? Because you're getting a series of secondhand knowledge. When you get a series of secondhand knowledge, it distorts the information. It does not, when you share some information, you do not share it accurately, 100%. There are different degrees of inaccuracies. So an auditor, somebody who have direct knowledge, will be more reliable than somebody who do not have direct knowledge. 4, the qualification of the individual providing information. The individual must be knowledgeable about providing such information. They must be knowledgeable of the information. Think of this, if you're looking at this band on my hand, do we know if this is gold? Or this could be gold plated? Now, how do we know if this is real gold? We take it to a jeweler and they test it. Right? A jeweler could just look at it and probably tell you if it's gold or not and whether, how much carat it is, because they are qualified to do that. We as accountants are not qualified to do that. You're looking at technology. A computer chip may be valued next to nothing, or it may be very valuable, depending on the technology. If it's a very new, usable technology, it could be very valuable. We as auditors don't have the qualification to do that, but we employ professionals who do. Now go back to your transcript. Your transcript is prepared by individuals who have the qualification to provide information. The degree of objectivity. How objective the information is. Information that are subjective are more biased than information that are very objective. If I give you an accounting problem to prepare an income statement and I have points that go with each part, then it's easier to grade because it will be either right or wrong. And if you have the whole thing correct, you should have the full point. On the other hand, if I ask you a question on describe auditing, it's very subjective. What is the full correct answer of the description of auditing? We have seen auditing can be described in a paragraph. We have seen auditing can be described in a book, right? So it becomes more subjective. Information that is objective are generally more reliable than information that is subjective. Think of another thing. Your height. Your height is very objective. I could measure you and know exactly your height is, what your height is. On the other hand, if I say how beautiful you are, that's very subjective. Then we said that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. What somebody might think is beautiful may not be what I think is beautiful, right? We all have our different opinions on beautiful. So talking about somebody being beautiful is very subjective. And number 6, timeliness. The information must be very timely to be useful. You're taking auditing now. Your performance in the class, you should study and obtain your knowledge while you're in class to do the best on your exam. So to affect your grade, whatever you do in the classroom over the semester have to be done during the semester. If you do it after the semester is over, well, it's good for you. You know auditing, nothing wrong with that, but it's not timely to affect your grade. In accounting, everything that we do, timeliness plays an extremely important part of what we do in accounting. The career of an accountant. Most people think of April 15th being today. The deadline for taxes are very important. Well, this year they extended to May 17th. So we still got another month and 2 days to file taxes. But April 15th is not such a significant day. If you miss the deadline, you get some penalties from the IRS. Big deal. If you're practicing in SEC accounting and your client needs a financial statement to go public, they're doing a filing, and they're raising millions of dollars, if that information is not timely, it could cost your client millions of dollars. So it is important as an accounting student to start developing the attitude of doing things on a timely basis. Timeliness is extremely important in this profession. And that's why when students email me their homework after the due date, I do not accept it. You have to develop that habit and that characteristic of doing things on a timely basis because it's extremely important in the profession that you're going to be in. You do not want to file the client financial statement late. Also, you do not want to file the client tax return late, but that's not so important as the financial statement when it is due. And if you're doing SEC practice, everything have a due date. If you're a broker-dealer, your financial statements are due March 1. If you're a public company, your financial statement also have its due date, whether it's the annual or the quarterly, and it depends on when your year end is. So you want to practice doing things on a timely basis. If you're an accountant and you cannot do things on a timely basis, you cannot be a good accountant. So the classroom is where we practice these things. And any professor in accounting who are allowing you to submit your work anytime you want, and even after due dates, they're not training you to become a very successful accountant. A very successful accountant have to pay attention to due dates. And everyone who goes into public accounting, almost 90% of the students that go into public accounting end up doing in auditing. They started out in auditing before they move into different areas. And they will be involved in financial statements. Anybody in public accounting has various different due dates. When I used to be in auditing in the days, every lay person, April 15th is the deadline for taxes. No, I have a March 1st deadline. The March 1st deadline is for my broker-dealer financial statement. And that's an extremely important deadline, because if they do not meet that deadline or get an extension, they get kicked out. Unlike the tax deadline. And then we have March 15th deadline for corporate income taxes. And then if we have clients that have year-end audit, we have March 31st deadline for the financial statement. Then we have the April 15th deadline. And for clients that have fiscal year, we have deadline throughout the years. So if you're going to be successful in this profession, in this environment, you want to practice that as a part of your habit. Every April 15th, most accountants are pulling their hairs off, trying to get their last minute stuff done. April 15th, my office used to close half day. Why? Because we finished all of our work. I used to finish all of my work the day before. And the morning of April 15th is for anything that comes up important, and half day we finish and close. A well-efficient office will be very productive. And you want to develop yourself into a very efficient person. Part of that is you meeting your deadlines. And start that while you are in college. That's where the trials and errors occur. That's where you learn not only the material, but you also want to learn the habits, the traits, the characteristics of what will make you a successful accountant. A successful accountant is not only good at the book work or the auditing in the textbook or the financial accounting, etc. They also have good characteristics and good habit that is conducive to the profession. Relationship among evidence decision and persuasiveness. Audit evidence decision, audit procedure and timing. What are the qualities that affect persuasiveness? We talk about appropriateness. They must be relevant and they must be reliable. Relevant means that they are pertaining to the situation at hand. For example, if I'm talking about your grades in auditing, your height or weight is not relevant to your grade. Your sex is not relevant to your grade. But your performance in the exam are relevant to the grade. The evidence must be reliable. And the 6 traits of what the reliable evidence contains. 1, the independence of the provider. 2, the effectiveness of internal control. 3, the auditor direct knowledge. 4, the qualification of the provider. 6, the objectivity of the evidence. And lastly, timeliness, which we just talked about. Sample size and item to select. Sufficiency. What is a sufficient sample size? Who make that determination? The auditor. How does the auditor make that determination? Based on their judgment. Selection of proper population item. Who make that decision? The auditor. Based on their knowledge of the information provided. Persuasiveness and cost. In anything that we do in accounting, it must be cost effective. My grandparents will call that, or my parents will say, you do not want to be penny wise and pound foolish. Well, they'll refer to in the British system, pennies and pounds, which are like $1. Pennies are like the coin. You try to save penny by spending a pound, right? You try to save $1 by spending, you try to save pennies by saving $1. You're trying to save pennies by spending $1. You don't want to be that. You want to be cost effective. In anything you do in life, you want to be cost effective. The cost of doing it should not exceed the benefit to be derived. In making decisions about evidence for a given audit, both persuasiveness and cost must be considered. The auditor goal is to obtain a sufficient amount of appropriate evidence at the lowest possible cost. And if you do that, you will maximize your profit in the audit, because an audit is a business. You're charging the client a fee for a service that you're providing. The service is coming at a cost. The lower the cost of providing that service, the more profitable the audit job will be. So now that we have finished talking about the characteristics of evidence, let's get into the type of evidence. And there are 8 different types of evidence that the auditor could choose from. Sometimes the auditor uses a combination of evidence, of types of evidence, to come to a conclusion. Sometimes one piece of evidence may drive you to a conclusion, for example, your transcript. Right? So let's talk about this 8 type of evidence and what they are. Types of audit evidence. We have 8 types: physical examination, confirmation, inspection, analytical procedures, client inquiry, recalculation, reperformance, and observation. Physical examination. I got a textbook and I'm physically examining it. Physical examination tells me that the textbook exists. It may tell me of the quality of the textbook, and it may tell me how it put together its condition. So physical examination, I'm looking, I'm holding, I'm touching, I'm feeling, and it tells me that the book exists. It tells me the quality. It tells me how it's put together. It tells me the condition. It does not tell me who owns it. It doesn't tell me the value. Now, I could get an indication of this value by looking at the edition, and I have to know something about textbook values. Okay? So physical examination tells us the existence and the condition. Confirmations. Confirmations, we are sending out requests to third parties, asking them to confirm some information to us. The most obvious one is bank confirmation. We're sending out a letter to the bank, asking the bank to confirm the client balance in the account as of the end of the year, which for a calendar year is December 31st. We also use confirmation in other areas, the most notably being accounts receivable. We also use them in accounts payable, and so on. Figure 7.1 tells us the relationship. The 8 evidence, we look at the type of evidence, and these are the broad category of evidence available to auditor, and they kind of put it in a picture of how it's related to the audit. But come back to confirmation. In the United States, the auditor must confirm accounts receivable. Auditor control the mailing and receipts of reply. These electronic confirmations are permitted. Internationally, confirmations are not required. Now, there are 2 types of confirmation that the auditor could send for receivables and other items. One is a positive, and the other is a negative. In a positive confirmation, the third party is required to respond. If they don't respond, we do not count it as a confirmation. Generally, we use positive confirmation to confirm large and important balances. Then the second type of confirmation is a negative confirmation, whereby the third party is required to respond only if the balance is incorrect. Now, positive confirmation are more reliable than negative confirmation. Why? In a positive confirmation, if the person doesn't reply, we do not count that as a confirmation. In a negative confirmation, if the person do not reply, we assume that the balance is correct, which may not be so, because if the confirmation gets lost in the mail and never get to the party that it's intended to, then they cannot confirm. Here we have a list of items that we generally often confirm. Positive confirmation we will use for important balances like large accounts receivable. Negative confirmation we may use either in accounts payable, or if we have, like, if we are doing the cable company and they have a great number of small accounts receivable, we may use negative confirmation because it's cheaper to administer. Third type of evidence is inspection. We will inspect documents. So when I'm looking for your grade in accounting 202, one piece of evidence, if I inspect your transcript, one document I'm looking at, it will be very persuasive and tell me what your grade is. So in an inspection, we're examining the client documents and records. There are internal documents versus external documents. Internal documents are those documents that are developed by the client and the client only. For example, sales invoice are internal documents. External documents are those documents that either generate externally outside of the client environment or have to be verified by a third party. For example, a vendor invoice would be an external document. A lease agreement, a signed lease agreement would be an external document because it's signed by the client and a third party. A check itself is an internal document, but a canceled check is an external document. You have to be verified by the bank. External documents are generally more reliable than internal documents because external documents pass through an independent third-party hands. Analytical procedure. Analytical procedures, we're looking at relationship. We're looking at relationship among items. For example, we may do a trend analysis. We compare 2019 and 2018 income statement with 2020 income statement. We do a trend analysis. And we're looking at the relationship of net income. Or we may do a vertical analysis. Look at net income in relation to sales and in relation to cost of goods sold. Analytical procedure help us to understand the client industry and business. It assess the entity ability to continue as a going concern. It indicates the presence of possible misstatement in the financial statement, and it reduces detailed audit tests. Analytical procedure by themselves are not conclusive in nature. We need other audit evidence to support it. Then we have inquiry of client. We're asking the client questions, whether orally or their written representation by the client. They're also a type of important audit evidence. Not reliable generally by themselves, but they are nonetheless important. Recalculation. We're recalculating some of the calculation the client already have done. We're recalculating the ending inventory balance using the LCM method. Reperformance. Reperformance is different from recalculation. Recalculation, we are recalculating depreciation. We are recalculating an inventory balance. A reperformance, we are retracing a procedure that the client has done. For example, we see a balance in the trial balance. Well, that balance has to be traced back to a source document. So we look at the source document that gives evidence of the transaction. We trace it to the general ledger. We trace it to the journal where it's recorded, then the general ledger, then the trial balance. We retrace the process to see that it is done correctly. And observation. Observation, we will observe the client plant and facility to see how things are done. We use one's sense to assess the client activity. We may tour the client plant, take a tour. Observation is extremely important. When you get a new client and the first day on premise, you will want to tour their facilities. Touring the facilities is important because you're meeting all the important employees of the client, all the president, the vice president, the controller, the chief financial officer. Observation is rarely sufficient by itself, but it needs to be corroborated by some other form of evidence. Nonetheless, it's important for you to know the client operating environment. And here they give you a nice diagram, table 7.4, on the appropriateness of the type of evidence. They also give you some terms that kind of are descriptive of the type of evidence. If they said they examine, they're using inspection. If they scan, they're using analytical procedure. If they read, they're using inspection. If they compute, they're using analytical procedure. If they recompute, they're doing etc. So you could go through that. And now we will move on to the second part of the chapter, audit documentation. And the second part is not as long as the first part, but the second part of the chapter starts on page 199, audit documentation. Audit documentation, we are really talking about, first let me read what it says. Audit documentation is a record of the audit procedure performed, relevant evidence, audit evidence, and conclusions the auditor reached. They're really talking about the auditor work papers, how you put together a set of work papers. The work papers are the documentation of the work the auditor does. The work papers are the auditor property, the audit work papers, and they are used as evidence to support the conclusion reached by the auditor. They are also used to show that the audit was conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. So the purpose of the audit documentation is to support the audit work done and to show that the audit was conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. The ownership of the audit files, they are owned by the auditor. These files are always confidential. Any information you obtain in the audit of the client is confidential. Requirement for retention of the audit documentation, you generally keep them for 7 years. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act requires auditors of public company to prepare and maintain audit working papers for a period no less than 7 years. Prepare and organize audit documentation. When you finish with your audit work paper, it would be similar to a book. You open this textbook. I got an index, and the index lists all the chapters. And each chapter is breaking up into the different category and the pages. Likewise, your audit work paper should be broken up the same way. Okay? Should be organized similarly. It should be organized similar to your textbook. Now, when we talk about audit document, Let me say hi to my grandbaby. I'll be right back. Yes, love. Bring it close. Go on. Okay. Go on. Okay. Audit documentation. There are two types of files we're going to talk about. There's the permanent file and the current file. The permanent file contains all information that affect more than 1 year of audit. Information that is permanent in nature, the client organization, the client organization chart, the articles of cooperation. If the client have a loan or a lease agreement, a 5-year or six-year loan or lease agreement, it will be in your permanent file. In the current file, you'll have the information that just affect this year current audit. By the way, are you hearing me? Yeah, my speaker is 100%. Now, so the permanent file are those files that affect more than 1 year and that are historical or continuing nature. These files are intended to contain data of a historical or continuing nature pertinent to the current audit. So it's going back to the client company when it started, or it may also contain information that affects more than 1 year. So if you have a 5-year lease agreement, it goes in your permanent file. The current file will contain information that affects the current year audit only. Generally, this will include the audit program, some general information on the current year audit, the working trial balance, adjusting and reclassification entries, and any supporting schedules like accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory schedules, etc. Don't look at this figure if it confuses you, but it's showing the relationship of audit documentation to the financial statement. Come on, love. Come on. Okay, say hi. Say hi. There are people there in my classroom over in New York. I'm lecturing. Mama. Yeah, I see Mama. Okay. Say hi, good girl. Blow them a kiss. Okay, give me a hug now. Okay, give Nana a hug. Give Nana a hug and kiss. Okay. Okay, go with mommy now. Okay, let Nana teach. Bye, love. Okay. Yeah, these are all the little fringe benefits of working from home. I can spend time with my granddaughter while I'm teaching. Type of supporting schedule, analysis, trial balance or list, reconciliation of amount, test of reasonableness. All these are in your current file. Summary and procedures, examination of supporting document, information, outside documentation. These are all in your current file. Preparation of audit documentation. You want to properly identify each file. The file should be indexed and cross-referenced. Think of each chapter as being a file. There should be a connection between each chapters. So you want to index them and cross-index them. You want to have a clear indication of the work performed. It should include sufficient information and it should state the conclusion reached. And 7, describe how technology affects audit evidence and audit documentation. The beginning of the chapter, We talk about how technology affects everything we do in our daily lives, including the audit environment. Audit evidence is increasingly in electronic form. Auditor must evaluate how electronic information affect their ability to gather evidence. Auditor use computer to read and examine evidence. Software programs are typically window-based. Now, these are not only in auditing, but in anything in accounting. And not only in accounting, in every facet of our lives, technology is playing a very important part. So, as student, you want to embrace technology. Okay? Some students were not favoring taking online classes. Some of you probably still don't prefer to take online classes. A lot of my education recently have been. Okay, sorry guys, I lost internet connection for a minute, but I was at the end of, go back to share my screen. Okay, I was at the last item of discussion, effect of technology. I was saying that you should embrace the technology as a student because it plays such an important part in our daily life. So I encourage you as student, I know some of you are adverse to technology. You came from a foreign country, we are not used to this. It's here to stay. We have to embrace it. Okay. There's so much things that you could do with your cell phone today that you don't really need a computer a whole lot. I could be lecturing from my cell phone. You could, some of you are probably taking my class on your cell phone. And I applaud you for those who are embracing and encouraging technology. So this will conclude our lecture for today. Let me go back to not sharing screen and see if anybody have any questions.
Professor, will we have class next week?
Next week is for you to study for your exam. We're probably gonna meet on Thursday morning for a short bit and see if anybody have any questions or any concern. Your exam is on the 27th. Okay, so you got chapter 4, 5, 6, and 7. You need to study and review. And if you have questions on a week from today, I'll come on and I will address all the questions or issues. And we'll talk about the exam. Any other questions?
Professor, you said the 27th, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Professor,
Go ahead.
so the exam will be on May 17, right?
No, the second exam will be on the 27th. The final may be on May 17th. I got to check the date. Okay.
Oh, okay. So second exam will be April 27.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Professor, could you explain one more time about the confirmation that you said 2 types? One is when you sent out the confirmation and people reply and the third party replies, and the other one, like you assume if they don't reply back, you assume that
that's fine. I know what you're talking about.
is correct, right?
There are 2 types of confirmation. There is a positive confirmation and a negative confirmation. In a positive confirmation, let's
process confirmation and?
Sorry? Positive confirmation, negative confirmation.
I can't hear you properly. You're breaking on.
Maybe my internet is not that good. Yeah, can you hear me now? Hello? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit now.
Ms. Shashra, can you hear me?
Yes, now, but
Okay.
your voice keeps on breaking.
I think it's my internet is doing that. My internet is a little weak today. Anyway, there's positive and there's negative confirmation. In a positive confirmation, the third party is required to respond. So in a positive confirmation, if you do not receive the confirmation back, you do not count it because they're required to respond. In a negative confirmation, the third party is not required to respond. So if you do not get the confirmation back, you count that as if the balance is correct. In the negative confirmation, the third party is only required to respond if the balance is incorrect. So the one that you don't get back, you'll assume that those balances are correct. Did that help?
Yes, but do we still use both in audit like now?
Depends on, yes, we do, depending on the situation.
Okay, what are the types when you use like the
Them
negative
for different
confirmation?
things. If you have large imported accounts, you use positive confirmation. If you have small accounts that are not that important, you use negative confirmation.
So if it's a small account, so you're saying if it's small accounts that are not important, then even if it's a negative confirmation, like we apply negative confirmation
Let's
there.
take an example. Let's take what's the cable company in Queens? Is it Quicks Cable? Time Warner? Nobody knows the cable company in Queens? Anybody watch TV?
Mm-hmm.
Or let's say the phone company. Who's the phone company in Queens? Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Someone said Verizon. I think my grandma has Spectrum, I think.
So let's take Spectrum, right? Spectrum providing internet. Most of the household clients, not the commercial client, the household client, their account balance will be relatively small. Because as soon as you owe them over 2 months, what they do, they cut off your service. So your balance will be under $500 definitely. So for most of the household client accounts receivable, you're probably going to use negative confirmation. Because those accounts are not important, it will take a lot of them to make the financial statement misleading. However, the business client, one account may be $100,000. So the business client, you will use positive confirmation because the accounts are more important, the balances are larger. Did that help?
Yes, meaning that there is no set of rules that will that will
Depends on the auditor judgment. A lot of things that we do in
it's on
auditing
the auditor's
depends on
judgment.
auditor judgment. This is not a course like, like financial accounting, the income statement either correct or wrong. A lot of what we're doing here is based on the auditor knowledge, opinion, and judgment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? And my apologies for the internet connection. I'll see you guys a week from today. Any questions? I'll be happy to address them. Okay. Have a wonderful day.
You too, Professor.
Thank
Great.
you.
Let me check my chat, see if there's any questions I have to ask. Okay, here we go. All right, guys, take care. Enjoy your day. And we'll talk in a week. Study hard for your exam, okay? It's on the 27th. Bye for now.